Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Strong Communities Select Committee. We have some officers and we've got Cabinet here as well. So if we could go around and do some introductions. I'm Councillor Lisa Dimmock, Chair of this committee, and stand for Undy Ward.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance, and here this morning in a scrutiny capacity.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Hazel Clatworthy, Sustainability Policy Officer.
Sally Thomas, HR.
Mark Howcroft, Assistant Head of Finance.
Councillor Jane Pratt, Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Neighbourhood Services.
Clinton and a member of this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Roger Harris, Cresson Ward, Abergavenny, and member of this committee.
Councillor David Dovey, a member for St King's Mark Ward in Chepstow, and a member of this committee.
Linda Guppy, member of this committee and County Councillor for Rogget Ward.
Councillor Tony Easton, Dewster Ward, Caldecott, member of the committee.
Mark Cleaver, Environmental Officer for Waste and Street Services.
Carl Tewig, Head of Neighbourhood Services.
Rob O'Dwyer, Head of Business Transformation.
Thank you all. And do we have any declarations of interest? Or should we just do it as and when?
As and when, Chairman.
Okay. I know Councillor Jo Watkins wanted to be here today, who brought the motion forward on climate change to full council, but she's having her cast taken off after a break, so she sends her apologies. Do we have any other apologies?
No other apologies for absence, Chair.
And I don't believe there's any members of the public, so there's no open public forum. So if we go to item 4, Budget Monitoring Report, Month 2, Quarterly Scrutiny, and that is David Loader and Mark Hancroft.
Thank you, Chair. What I'd like to do is provide a bit of context before David gets into the detail of this. I've been missing from Select and Scrutiny, even though this is my my periodic monitoring report, but the feedback I've been getting from finance managers is that members are finding the reports a bit sophisticated, quite complicated, and would like us to actually look to see how we might address that. I'm just conscious that this report is presented in a similar format to the Outturn one last year, and didn't want you to feel particularly upset or felt that the officers weren't actually listening to you. What I've arranged to do is to meet with the 4 chairs of the Select to better understand your concerns firsthand and see how we might address that. There are a number of ways that we might do that, either by splitting up the capital, the revenue and the reserves position into 3 reports, which might make it easier to digest, although probably won't do a lot for the agenda management. It would still be the same length of the report, albeit chunked up in a slightly different fashion. I probably ought to also acknowledge that actually, I think you're right. The reporting position is actually getting a bit more complicated, and actually that's probably intuitive of the fact that we're now moving into a position where we're reporting quite a significant deficit. So my understanding is that members would want to appreciate the detail of that in perhaps more level than they would a similar level of surplus. I think also our stance towards budget management around providing remedial savings and recovery plans rather than actually adjusting the operating model means that we're actually having to report compensatory savings and adjustments to the accounts there rather than change some of the budgets, which makes it additionally complicated. And I think a feature that we rely very heavily on ad hoc grant funding from Welsh Government within year means that actually the budget that you see periodically tends to be a bit of a movable feast in terms of the resources you've got available and the monitoring, which also requires some explanation. Some of the feedback I've received is, well, could we not have a one-page summary? And I think I can understand that direction of travel, but the one thing I would like to speak to the chairs about is how we are still able to satisfy the purpose of the report, which is to hold Cabinet to account for the quality of its budget management if you're receiving something completely different that they receive. So there's 1 or 2 problems and challenges that I would like to work through and understand that first-hand approach. But I thought I'd come here first off and face the mood music and explain why the situation is as it is before Dave got into the detail of the report. So would you like to provide any feedback at that point, or would you like to go into the main report?
Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think we should all receive all the information that you've given here for those that know about it and want to delve deeper. But I need to know from you what your concerns are on for finances that apply to this particular committee. You know, where it's going well and where you're worried. And then we can delve as much as we want into the full documentation. I think it's important to have that, but highlight your whoopies and your otherwise, if you know what I mean. Thanks, Chair.
Unfortunately, I've got far more otherwise than whoopies at the moment. No, I take the point, Councillor. I mean, one of the challenges that I've got, and you appreciate that I have tried to bend with some of this in terms of colour coding it, that means that it stands out better to individual scrutiny portfolios. The one thing about the budget management is that we manage the budget on a holistic basis. So if I go into Children's Select and report the level of children's services overspend of 2.4 million, without actually explaining that other parts of the services which may not be part of that portfolio are actually bearing some of that slack, it can provide an artificial situation, but I understand the challenge you've set me, and with the chairs we'll try to work out how we might resolve that for you.
Councillor Webb?
Yes, well, what you've just said, it's going to be quite a difficult thing to do. It's quite challenging. But an executive summary, in other words, is something that I could really get interested in, whereas too many figures, just really... I'm not a figure person, and an executive summary or something that you've suggested would be brilliant. Thank you. Oh, this isn't working.
David?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark.
Sorry, they'll do a minus and a plus, and you're not quite sure if it's a deficit or a surplus. And then, like on this report here, you've got an over or an underspend in brackets, but then you've got a red letter or a red numeracy with a minus. So, what is that? A minus of an overspend? It's a bit confusing. I still don't know what it means, and sometimes after 5 minutes you can work it out by going through a series of figures throughout the report. But it's not clear, so can we, you know, the finer points, can you look at that?
No, I will...
To hold the people in finance, it's natural language, but it's code for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Actually, we're actually trained or qualified to understand that a credit or a minus is necessarily a good thing, an overspend or a debit is a bad thing. But understanding that you wouldn't necessarily have that perspective, we could make it clearer. Thank you.
So are we saying that you want a summary or a toolbox explaining? How would you...
Could I volunteer a perspective on this? I mean, understanding this firsthand and actually recognising that at the next chair's meeting there'll be a fuller conversation. Rather than provide 4 different things to 4 different selects, there's probably a role to actually try to reconcile what different selects need. So taking that feedback back, I'm more able to respond to chairs in terms of what we might be able to do.
Over to you, David.
Okay, thank you again. So good morning, everybody. So this is the Period 1 Revenue and Capital Outturn Report. It's based on forecasts extrapolated out from figures from month 2, which is May. Okay, so this went to Cabinet on the 31st of July. As Mark has mentioned, the elements that relate to this select committee are highlighted in green to help you identify that area. So obviously I'll give you a brief run through, and we'll be happy to answer some questions at the end if you have any. So if you move to section 2, which is the recommendations that were proposed to Cabinet, I suppose the main problem area we have there that needs to be highlighted is the 2.4 million deficit that members have had to consider for the council. 2.2, that members note the performance of budget savings. 2.3, that members note the performance of our capital budget. And 2.4, that members note the movements in reserves. So if you move on to section 3, that gives us the outturn position for the authority. Like we said in recommendation 2.1, it's currently shown a £2.4 million deficit. The table in 3.2 gives you a breakdown of how that £2.4 million is made up. Now, even though we can see there that our social care and health department is overspending by 2.4 million, you will notice that there are other departments within the authority that are also overspending, and there's departments that fall under the select committee that are overspending as well. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. There's a little table underneath 3.3. Again, it just briefly highlights our main areas of concerns throughout the authority, or where our main pressures are, being additional learning needs, children's services, passenger transport, car parking, and Mon Life. Now, if I can draw your attention to paragraphs 3.11 and 3.12. Now, those two paragraphs mention the Ealing ruling and the possibility of reimbursement of VAT, a windfall of VAT reimbursement. Now, obviously this report was written before that was adopted, so Cabinet adopted that ruling last week, I think. So Monmouthshire is now in for a VAT windfall, and now that obviously has an impact on the figures in this report, because that windfall could negate the current forecast outturn position for the authority. But what we have to realise is that windfall is one-off, so we must realise that we can't use that to mask the existing pressures that the authority have. Now obviously officers know that, so even though this windfall may help the authority out this year, officers still know, they know what those burdens are, know where the pressure points are, and they are working towards sorting them out, mitigating them. Okay. So table 3.13, that just gives you a comparison of the performance of the authority over the last 5 years. And again, you can see the significant decline in performance over the last couple of years. Moving on to section 3.1.5, that's just a table that highlights our performance against our savings targets. So we actually built in just under £6.5 million worth of savings targets into the 1920 budget. Of those savings, we found 88% of them, just under 5.7 million. And of the ones that we haven't found, 402,000 have been deemed unachievable, and 346,000 delayed. There is an appendix attached in Appendix 1 that gives you more detail on why some of these savings weren't achieved. Okay. So if we move on to 3.1.9, this is the summarised version of how the Strong Community Select portfolio is managing. So section 3.1.9, you can see that the portfolio is forecasting to underspend by £750,000. Now that's broken down between a number of areas, and you can see there's more detail there, but I'll briefly run through them. So Chief Execs is a £30,000 overspend. That's mainly down to some staff issues in contact centres, and our land charges income isn't coming in against our profile budget as we like. Our resources section is underspent by £106,000. We've got an IT underspend of £68,000. We've got a surplus on our corporate landlord division of £124,000. Corporate is £478,000 underspent. That's basically down to unutilised redundancy budget. We always set aside some budget in year for redundancies, and that hasn't been used up yet. Okay. and £138,000 underspend on appropriations and £58,000 underspend on financing. Now that section also gives you a brief explanation on a saving that falls within this portfolio that hasn't been found. So we mentioned, we had a table earlier on about savings performance, and we'll see that we had a shortfall on our commercial investments income, and that's because we've got some vacant units in Castlegate, I think the Castlegate site. So our actual income has fallen below targets. And there's also a paragraph in there highlighting the recovery activities that the Directorate have already undertaken to try and offset the overspend for the authority. So what we've done, we've managed to move £200,000 worth of revenue costs across to capital. So it's revenue, it's capital qualified expenditure that has been sat in our revenue, so we've moved it across. And that was £100,000 worth of laptops and £100,000 worth of building maintenance. You'll also see Peter Davis's Director's commentary. I think there's a little bit more detail on the overs and underspends in his areas, just to give you a bit more detail. So if you move on to paragraph 3.2.3, which is, we're moving on to capital now, which is page 16, I think. Yeah, page 16. So this breaks down our capital, the capital budget forecast for the year. The paragraphs there also give you details of any additions that have been made to the programme in 1920. The overall authority's capital programme is forecasting to come in on budget, although we're slipping just over £1.1 million worth of budget relating to the Crick Road Care Home scheme, which has been delayed until next year, or an element of it has been delayed until next year. All the schemes under this select committee are forecasting to come in on budget, and we're not anticipating any slippage. So then running through on to 3.2.4, that just is a table that runs through the financing mechanisms to fund the capital spend for the year, and 3.2.5 just profiles the capital receipts activity for the year. And then the last area, which is our reserves, which is section 3.2.6, which is on page 21. Now, obviously, again, I mentioned earlier on about the Ealing ruling and this VAT windfall. This was written before that, so I'll just go through the original version, and then we can obviously just amend it. Yeah. So obviously, this table summarises the anticipated draw on reserves for 1920. Now that includes the expected overspend on council fund activities and school deficits. So if there had been no change, then our council fund balance would only be £4.7 million, which equates to 3.19% of our net budgeted expenditure. Now that actually falls below the appropriate guidelines for reserve level, which is between 4 and 6. Now obviously this position will have changed now, because this VAT windfall has come in. So hopefully the authority's outturn position won't be in deficit, so we won't have to draw on reserves, so reserve levels should stay the same. So just to sum up then quickly, so revenues, we have a major pressure to deal with. I mentioned earlier, we are still continuing to work on recovery plans to help mitigate the shortfall. We will now benefit from the VAT windfall, but it doesn't hide the recurring pressure points that are in the authority and need to be managed. Capital, no current major pressures, particularly in our area. So we're assuming that's on budget at the moment. And we just mentioned reserves. Without Ealing, then our council reserves may have dropped below recommended levels. So there is still a bit of work to do, especially going on into budget setting, which is starting to try and mitigate these inherent pressures that we seem to have. Okay, so thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, David. So members, anyone have any questions on this item?
Currently we have a few units vacant within Castlegate. We are advertising, we are promoting. Hopefully we will fill them, but it is a pressure at the minute because we have assumed that we'd have more occupancy than we have. So our finance staff and our estate staff are looking into it to try and generate some income, some occupancy.
Thank you. Okay. So just to reconfirm, there's no questions that members have or any comments they wish to make. Thank you.
You mentioned about the Castlegate. What about the Newport Leisure Park? Because obviously that's newer and maybe a little bit in its infancy. But you foresee that's we need to carry forward a deficit. But what's that looking like? Is that because it's in its infancy, or is it because of sort of over forecasts of activities and use?
No, so the only pressure point within our investment property portfolio is on Castlegate. Our Newport Leisure Park is fine, it's meeting its targets. I think most of the units are filled, so we are meeting our budgeted targets on that one. It's just the Castlegate that we've got some vacant plots. Okay.
Can I provide a bit of context to both those activities? Both those activities were investments of the council through the discretion that full council gave to create a commercial investments portfolio. Part of the business case consideration was that in the first hand, before it was considered, it needed to be able to wash its face in terms of its finance costs. So the finance costs, the borrowing associated with buying both Castlegate and Newport Leisure Park are fully secured. There are, however, some rental vacancies within Castlegate that means that we have also provided an income target within our general revenue account, which aren't being met at the moment. Because it is a commercial investment, that will periodically go back to the investments committee and the audit committee in terms of performance. And the council, unlike operational assets, has a different view on commercial investments and whether it realises them or whether it does things differently to amalgamate spaces. It needs to be a far more active policy than we would do for, say, an operational asset. So I think we've got a bit of a hiatus on the building, on the operational side of Castlegate at the moment. I hesitate to suggest Brexit, but no one's actually making decisions to invest in buildings or new space as a prelude to the 31st of October. So we are in a bit of a hiatus position, which I think will probably resolve itself after that period. But I wanted to reassure members that actually, because it is a commercial investment, it's actively looked at by members in 2 other forums.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Issa.
Thank you. You mentioned Castlegate, Mark, and the vacancies within Castlegate. How many units are there available in, or how many units in Castlegate are there? How many are being used, and how many do you find that you need to fill? And what is your projection on number of units you might have in the future?
My recollection is, and I'll have to check the figures and come back to you separately in terms of the precise ones, but there's of the order of 30 business units within Castlegate. The business plan presumed about an 80% take-up of that. I think we're about 65% at the moment, so there's probably about four or five units that need to be filled.
So on that basis, you are looking to redevelop Castlegate by increasing the units that are there from, say, let's say 30 to maybe 36. Is it viable to spend all that money, spend all capital in investing within Castlegate if you can't fill the place at the moment and it's on a 65% capacity at the moment and you want 80% to be viable?
That's certainly one of the ultimate solutions for the council, to consider a different use for it. What I'm describing at the moment is that the Castlegate footprint has traditionally those amount of units. Some of them don't lend themselves very easily to reletting, either because they haven't got a nicer aspect to some of the others, or that they're mezzanine arrangements. There are abilities that you can do within the building to actually take certain walls down to make them more attractive spaces that will make them more lettable. But I suspect that whatever the council does in the short term, until we've got some business certainty around what Brexit might look like, that actually advertising those things and doing that work in the short term probably is not the right action.
So would it be premature to have taken a decision to evict the Caldecott Musical Theatre Society, give them 6 months' notice when you can't fill the place at the moment, and you're then looking to develop that particular theatre area they've created, which costs well over £30,000. You can't fill the place at the moment. Yeah, you want to evict them. I know it's been extended now. I don't know how long for. But in the long term, wouldn't it be far better to have an arrangement with the council, with Monmouthshire County Council and the Caldecott Musical Theatre Society to set up a viable operation within that area, because you can't fill what you got at the moment?
Clearly those considerations are service-led, but if I give you my perspective of commercial investments, they should really be let units. I understand that actually that choir has been using the facility for a little while there, and has been offered some alternative good accommodation to utilise. What I would like to see is 100% usage of that as a commercial entity, providing rents that will actually mean that we're not reporting shortfalls against income targets. Now, whether that means that there is still an opportunity for the choir to occupy that, or whether there is an alternate facility that they might actually utilise, as I described initially, very much a service perspective.
Well, my understanding is that they haven't been offered a viable place to go, but that's another matter. That's for them, not for me. But what I'm looking at is the fact that the facility is there. The facility could be exploited by the Monmouthshire County Council within the building as it is now for conferences and things like that to make it viable. As I say, you've got a 65% capacity there. Sorry, you've got a 65% occupancy at the moment. You'd like to have 80. We've also got the place at Mega Wales 4, which we can't fill also. I think that the strategy you take in should be looked at in a different way to encompass what the community want, to try and improve both community cohesion and the viability of that particular unit.
Can I just come in there, Mark? Just quickly, Deborah Hill-Howell sent out an email, because obviously, as I'm aware, the music group did contact members in the area, and she is assisting them with trying to find another suitable location. I just wanted to point that out. If you want to come back, Mark.
Yeah, I just described the fact that members need to look at both Castlegate and Newport Retail Park as commercial investments rather than operational assets. It's very sensible to actually look at community usage within our general portfolio of properties, but those were bought for a specific purpose, which was revenue generation. It may very well be that there's an arrangement to exploit here whereby the choir can afford to pay an equivalent business rent, but I'm not sure that's particularly likely. And actually, from a community aspect, there probably are more appropriate buildings for them to occupy.
As I say, I won't go into their particular aspects of how they run their business, but I am aware that they can't find an alternative place. They're paying about £12,000 a year rental at the moment. The authority is looking for maybe 30-odd thousand. I'm sure there must be more innovative ways of dealing with this matter. It does concern me that when this went through the investment committee, nothing was said about maybe we got rid of people who were in there because of the particular circumstances they are, but equally, that horse has been bolted now, and I think there should be ways of looking forward to this facility in other ways. I didn't expect to raise it this morning, but it's raised itself, so I'm just raising the matter.
Councillor Dovey, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was going to ask the very first part of Tony's question, so the question's been made already.
I have a question. Extra income from solar farms? Climate change is obviously a big council commitment now. Is there potential to further increase income from these sorts of investments and renewables?
There is. Our first solar farm actually provides a net income level now to us. And clearly renewable technology is the way to go. A lot of the tariff benefits are reducing, so they're not as attractive now as they perhaps once were. But the flip side of that is that technology is better, and therefore you get a better return for that. So it doesn't need to be subsidised to the same extent. There are not firm proposals, but the council is considering its response to climate change, and a second solar farm wouldn't be inconsistent with that. One of the challenges I might describe to you around the first solar farm is at the moment, because of the way that the electricity industry is regulated, we find that actually that solar farm and its generating potential can be influenced by Western Power or whatever in terms of turning that grid access off. So one of the things that I would advocate that we look at in relation to second solar farms and future is around generating status and actually taking the opportunity to become an energy company and not having the same restrictions. Now, we might always have those where actually we're working to someone else's network, in other words, the natural grid, but there's no reason we can't better tie in, say, second or third solar farms with actually housing developments and making them more sustainable prospects, or actually using the electricity ourselves rather than necessarily buying from the grid. There are different ways and different models of doing this. It was right that we did the way that we did in terms of learning experience from the first solar farm, but I think if we did a second one, there are probably factors that we would do very differently.
Thank you. And innovation.
Yeah, recording them against future Monmouthshire at the moment is just recognition that there's a bit of work being facilitated around future Monmouthshire and procurement. I think it's majority procurement savings, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, the future Monmouthshire budget is actually dealing as being used as a bit of a holding account at the moment. It relates to three particular funds of mandated savings from last year. One in relation to agency cost, one for mileage, and one for digital intervention. So there's a variety of reasons why those are still being rolled out. But at the moment, we're using the future Monmouthshire account to hold that particular mandate until we ascertain exactly which budgets will be taking that particular burden of that financial reduction. So within the next couple of months, those will be allocated out to each individual budget.
Okay, Councillor.
Bearing in mind, it's been touched on already, we are in changing times, if you like, as far as looking at business opportunities is concerned. Bearing in mind the way we raise our funds for these projects, does that give us a particular advantage at the moment over other businesses that are looking to acquire opportunities like we are? I mean, basically, I'm saying, does the way that we raise our money to make these acquisitions give us an advantage over the wider market at the moment looking to acquire properties?
Councils generally use something called the Public Works Loan Board to raise its money and undertake its investments. That's a government-run institution that provides preferential rates of funding rates to local authorities and public sector more generally. We probably do derive a lower cost of borrowing than say, a private investment company. We probably don't derive any greater benefit than, say, another local authority could borrow for. And actually, there are a number of local authorities that are looking in this investment field now. But actually, we've been quite prudent in the way that we've done it, that whilst we do have a lower level of borrowing, we insist that any business case that's put before an investment committee provides both a return for the council and also covers its 100% borrowing costs. So, and our borrowing costs are also influenced by our treasury management practices, and audit committee, if members attend there, subject to an annual treasury strategy designed to keep our rates as low as possible. So what we tend to do is we tend to use our resources as what's known as internal borrowing, and may very well utilise our resources before we look to derive external funding, so that our average borrowing costs are of the order of about 2%. So if you compare that to what the market will bear, it's probably about a 1.5% margin there.
Could I just come back on that as well? You have mentioned that there are other counties in the market as well now. Are we the county that generated this interest because of our own innovation? And is it likely that if we want to continue in the market, then we're going to have to be competitive with other councils if you get, well, my drift. If there is something really saying, if there's two councils interested in a particular project, how can we, if you like, be more competitive if we choose to be? I'm trying to understand how the market with the councils in it, which is closely monitored, governed, or whatever, is different to the market, the free trade market, if you want to call it that. Have I made myself clear? Or
I think so, Councillor. I mean, firstly, Monmouthshire's involvement in this isn't at the vanguard of it. It largely started within English authorities, although they do it slightly differently because their capital regulations are slightly different than Welsh authorities. We probably are in the vanguard of Welsh authorities that have done it. And I suspect that the rationale for doing it is very similar across both sectors. I mean, we suggest that Wales, the austerity measures are probably 18 months, 2 years behind England. That kind of is the same time frame of English authorities starting to look at these investments. And actually, most of them look at these investments from the purposes of how to sustain existing services that are provided for the benefit of communities. There is an inherent risk associated with any investment. So with the regard for public money and stewardship, you know, it has to be done with a degree of due diligence amongst any council, and some councils conclude that actually it's not worth that risk. There are other councils that recognise their circumstances are such that they have a different budget strategy that means that they try to keep as many services going rather than necessarily accepting they won't get the income in and have to cut services. So every council is slightly different. In terms of the competition between councils, well, yes, I mean, the borrowing considerations will be the same for any council, so that won't be a unique feature of Monmouthshire that advantages it against any other. I suggest what generally advantages any organisation considering investment is actually knowledge, is knowing what's coming to the market, and that necessarily isn't something that is widespread. Our Newport Leisure investment was actually one that was considered before the sellers chose to take it to the open market. So actually it suggests to me that we need to have engagement and relationships with a lot of the local estate agents to actually understand what's about there, and actually probably wider field than Monmouthshire, because as I described to Councillor Eason, these assets are commercial investments. You shouldn't necessarily look at them in the same focus as you would your operational assets, your county hall, etc., because they're purchased to deliver an income stream.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark and David. Are there any other questions, members? No? Okay, am I okay to sum up quickly? So we've discussed quite a fair bit today, and we understand the difficulties of Mark and Dave's job. Want a little bit more clarity with regards to the reports. I look forward to that meeting with myself and other chairs. Councillor Harris and Councillor Webb obviously raised those points, and Councillor Webb would like an executive summary. Councillor Guppy wanted an understanding around it, maybe a workshop or some seminar to help her understand a little bit more. That's correct, yeah. Obviously, Councillor Dovey challenged whether our investment decisions have realistic targets attached, and heard about a potential increase for income from renewables, which obviously we can discuss later when Hazel comes for item 5, is it? Item 6. Are there anything else? Obviously, I'm very delighted to hear that Newport Leisure Park is doing well. We just need to get some more people in at Castlegate. So thank you ever so much, both. Thank you. So we will move on to the People Services Annual Update on Sickness and Absence and Attendance Management, which Sally is here to present. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. We have previously provided a report which has provided an analysis of attendance for the authority. This report then provides the year-end analysis for 18-19. So the purpose is to provide some overall highlights in relation to data and then some related information, which I hope will be of interest to members this morning. So Table 1 then provides the overall summary position for the Council for the 1st of April 2018 to the 31st of March, that should read actually, 2019. So you will note that that provides actually a breakdown by directorate, and in the last column you'll see the cumulative column, and that provides the figures for each of the directorates. The bottom then, highlighted in green, provides the whole authority outturn figure, which is 11.2 days absence per employee, per FTE employee. So it provides the year-end outturns for the days lost per sickness. And you will note some of the highlight factors there. You can see that social care and health, along with operations, have the highest figures for absence at 16.13 days for social care and health and 16.91 for operations. You will note schools, particularly good outturn figure in relation to that at 8.76. And resources as well in terms of 6.96. In terms of some of the other information, I've provided a couple of the tables. You will see that Table 2 provides some of the top 3 reasons for absence. It does remain that as a whole authority, mental health absence remains as our highest reason for absence at 22% of the overall absence. Table 3 provides long and short-term comparisons. So there's no surprises there. Long-term percentage 67 and short-term is 33%. We've also this year provided an analysis of the occupational health support, just for some added information for you. So you've obviously read the report, so I won't go through that. But some of the analysis is quite interesting in terms of the reasons for referral and some of the information that we've received from our occupational health provider in terms of some of the detailed analysis on mental health absence. So it's important to note that although we have one category for mental health, some of the breakdown analysis from our counselling provider and our occupational health provider do indicate and separate some of it in terms of work-related depression and anxiety and stress, and then personal depression and anxiety and stress. So yes, the table there provides an analysis of the counselling support also provided. We've continued to receive very positive feedback from our workforce in terms of that provision. And I hope it's been helpful. The last table provides some priority areas and interventions for you to take a look at. In terms of some of our priority areas, clearly reducing the levels of sickness absence across adult services and operations remains our priority, and you can see some key actions in relation to that. The other one, of course, is our continuing efforts in assisting managers to be able to manage really well some of the absence in their areas, particularly associated with mental health reasons. And I've highlighted there some of the interventions that we have brought in over 18-19 year, and we continue to work on. It remains a priority for people services teams to provide the tools, guidance, information and support to managers, to the organisation, so that we manage absence and attendance at work in the best possible way. So there you will note in that last table, priority areas and interventions, some of the work that people services have had as a priority. And I'm happy to answer any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Can I just thank you for this report? I found it very easy to read. I don't know about other members, but compared to some of the reports we get to see, I found this a light read, although obviously there's some very important information in there. So I'll hand over to members. Anyone questions? Okay, Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a good report. Well, a very good report. I'll say a good report. One question. Can you, within this report, identify the levels of stress and stress-related conditions that contact centre staff and other members of staff who deal with the public? Has it increased or has it decreased? Is it a problem? And how can we deal with it? Because I understand that there's been a lot of angst on phones to members of staff. I understand that not just the contact centre staff, but staff in general. Do you get any feedback on the amount of stress caused by, let's call it anxious members of the public?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think it's fair to say as an overall, this is a report that's provided for the highlight data and information. So when we drill down, I'm sure many of you will have areas where, such as you've provided there. What I would say in that is that we try to enable managers to manage such scenarios really, really well. So my HR team undertake HR business partner meetings with managers so that we can discuss and support managers to support their staff really well in those areas. Clearly, we've got counselling, occupational health support. Should it become very stressful, we would advise team meetings that managers have open door policy, that staff talk about the issues, so they feel that they can approach the manager in those scenarios. If problems become very troublesome. And I know sometimes we have issues at schools, for example, where members of the public can be troublesome and problematic. Well, then, we would also see our legal section in that. That's the extreme to that. But certainly, we would support managers to support colleagues across the business where they're having that interface. It's really important to be proactive, to support our colleagues in every way that we possibly can to prevent them going off sick in such a scenario then, for example. So my answer is yes, we would support.
Because it seems to me that we're going through the times where, the time of times where it seems normal to throw abuse at people, and that will filter down onto employees who deal with members of the public face to face.
I think it's I accept those points. I think it's really important, given that, and particularly social media. I think we're seeing that increase, aren't we, for our colleagues? And I think we have to really set the bar high. We don't expect our colleagues to be abused. You know, we're all working in smaller teams as well. So that I think that's also a factor. So it's really important that systems and processes in teams where they're interfacing on the basis that you've described are really good, that they're able to have that narrative from their manager that says, for example, you know, if they're having a phone conversation, I know in our payroll team, sometimes they take a lot of, troubled calls and people aren't that nice to them. Well, our colleagues have to be enabled to deal with those calls in a way that's very professional, but actually there's processes that they understand that they can do. You know, for example, you know, I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm trying to answer your question, but I'm going to have to terminate the call if you continue to abuse me. And that's the same on contact centres. And I'm confident that the managers in those areas are enabling staff to feel confident to deal with their day-to-day tasks.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Just digressing on the last point you made, abusive calls like that, are they logged? If you know what I mean, per abusive call, per operator sort of thing. Just in case. Well, really, I suppose somebody is putting themselves in a difficult position simply because of their personality, if you know what I mean. Or the job that they do. Yeah.
I've got two perspectives on that. I'm not sure whether we record, I have to say. Log the number of calls. I would have to ask managers in contact centres whether that occurs. I do think if we have serial callers who are abusive, then I mentioned legal earlier, and I know that can happen, so that there's a more targeted intervention in those scenarios. I would hope that where there are, where there's potential for continuing abusive callers, that there are practices in those work areas that are able to support the colleagues. But I'm not sure about the recording of such.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, that was a digression. So thank you for the report. I thought it was very good and informative. But how do we, we've got our figures here, but are we good, if you know what I mean? And how do we compare with similar authorities with a similar spectrum of a workforce?
Okay, I can provide, actually, we haven't got the total figures for all Wales as yet, but I will look to get those. I think my understanding is, I wouldn't want to be quoted, we're about mid-range. It's not good enough. There's no complacency around this issue. This is a council priority. It's a priority for people's services. I think we have to recognise some of the dialogue that we've had this morning. We're working in, we have small teams in Monmouthshire, trying to covering lots of service areas. Every single team has seen reduction. So those figures are, I would say we're about the midpoint over the 22. But as I say, don't quote me. I will get the whole authority figure, the all Wales figures, and I can distribute those to the committee for your information.
Can I I just follow up on your first point made? When you say recorded, do you mean actually recording the calls or recording abusive call, logging? Okay, that's good. Okay, Matt, do you want to come in because you've been doing some work on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to give a bit of context and to flip roles a little bit from being sat in the scrutiny chair to putting my head of service hat back on, because community hubs and contact centre come within my area of responsibility. I mean, fortunately, the worst excesses of reaction are few and far between. But certainly those can be incredibly pressured environments. There was a point earlier in the year when we had some service changes going through, when colleagues across the board, in contact centres and some of our operational services, were dealing with extremely pressured situations. I'm confident from the people I've sort of liaised with on the operational side, when things sit there, people do sit up, take note and inject resources. So, for example, in the contact centre, at the time we were working through some staffing changes, which had resulted in some posts being frozen. But we made the decision to put agency staff back in because pressures were mounting. It still didn't solve all of the demand, and colleagues coped admirably and were a credit to the organisation in how they handled that. But for example, and Carl Tuig is in the room, we had some pressures in the waste area. Carl agreed to fund on a fixed term basis some additional resource to go into the contact centre. Colleagues in operations recognised that some of the pressures were coming from waste changes, and they resourced some additional capacity going into the contact centre. We have seen in a couple of instances, and if I reflect on the hubs, we've seen perhaps a coarsening of the public discourse over the last couple of months, if I can put it that way, and our colleagues on the front line are not immune to some of that. There have been a number of instances of difficult and challenging behaviour. And if I can give one example of a response, we had a couple of difficult situations in one of the community hubs. We've trialled a new... we liaise with Lawrence Dawkins, the Council's Health and Safety Manager, on that, log them with Lawrence and look at the appropriateness of the response. If it's extreme behaviour, we work with the Council's Community Safety Officer, who will also sort of liaise with the police on behalf of the authority. But in one particular case, what we did, we took the decision actually to close one of the community hubs for one day, to put all staff training in, because it was also an important signal of how valuable and that support to staff. And we brought in a specialist trainer to help people deal with those difficult behaviours and ensure that they had the necessary support. So, it was a difficult thing to do, to close a community hub for a day, but it was an important signal to those staff to say, we understand what you've been through, we understand you can be in increasingly pressured situations, and we ran that training course with them to give them that support. And it's something that we'll continue to monitor and sort of track as and when these issues arise.
Councillor Webb, I'm having to share because that's not working.
Did you hear what I said?
It doesn't occur with members. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's members of the general public, as I understand it. Yeah.
Councillor Dovey?
Thank you, Chairman. I understand the pressures on our officers, but I have to say I do get comments from people within my ward when they're trying to contact officers within the county here. I mean, there's one area that I know particularly where you go in, and if you were asked to speak to somebody, the operator says, I'll send him an email. It frustrates me because I want to have a conversation. I don't want to have some machine at the end of the line. And the other thing that happens, even if you use that, you will get the operator who's on the front, if you've made the call a number of times, and she will turn around and say, well, I know he's in or she's in because he's registered. I don't understand how the registering thing goes, but if you are a member of the public and you are told that the person you want to speak to is in, and even if you accept the fact that you are not going to speak to him, but he will phone you back, because that's the way the system works, and that doesn't happen, it isn't good. If you were selling something, you'd lose the sale. You've got to bear in mind that whilst we are a service operation to Joe Public, if you're going to use this thing, it has got to work well for you. And to be frank, with some of the, and I'm not going to say where my levels of anxiety are, but there are, if we are going to go down this route, then the things that you put in place, like the monitoring of whether the particular person might be outside staff, you want to get hold of is in, then they should answer the punter. And it doesn't happen. And for us on occasion, when we are trying to get the answer on behalf of the punter, it doesn't happen for us either. So there are real weaknesses within this system. And if we want to minimize the angst that the public feel, then you've got to make the system you've got and you want to work properly. And in certain instances within this council, it really doesn't work. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. I suppose that doesn't really fall within Sally's remit. I know Matt might be able to help you with that, but obviously we all appreciate people do want to speak to someone. No, not everyone is computer literate or familiar with it. So Monty the chatbot, which I think is a very good tool that we should all be very proud of. I use it myself when I've got issues. We've also got the My Monmouthshire app. But yes, I take on board your comments that sometimes people want to speak to someone. But I think, doesn't that fall on members? I know when I see stuff rising on Facebook, I put myself out there as, my role is the connection between constituents and local authority. I take that on as my duty because
But when you try to do it and it still doesn't work, you say, all right, leave it to me, and you go through the process.
If you put your mic on.
Even if your client comes back to you and says, well, I'm sorry, I've been trying, I cannot get anybody to speak to me or answer to me or come back to me, and you try and you get the same sort of results, it doesn't look very good, because you're going to have to go eventually back to the client and say, well, I'm sorry, I will continue to do this, but I'm afraid I can't get you the answer at the moment either. So we are not doing the thing as well as we could in terms of the forward facing. And to say the personal touch is important in anything that you are doing that involves the public. And I do think in some areas we are missing that now, and it really does concern me.
Okay. I think if you don't get answers back off someone, I would escalate that to the department head. But maybe this is something we can look into and liaise with department heads to ensure that doesn't happen anymore. Obviously, some things will slip through the net, and I appreciate that. That happens in everyday life. But yes, you're right. And if people need an answer, you should be getting it, you or your constituent. Councillor Harris?
Yeah, it's important to for all of us to realise that an officer can't be available to us in the whole of the working day, that they are working, and they may be at a meeting. The receptionist or wherever it is doesn't know that, just that she knows or he knows that the officer is in, but that is not sensible news to give to somebody, because there's obviously good reasons why that officer isn't replying. At least I hope there's good reason. So we need to be careful. And I know that if I can't speak to an officer about a particular topic, then send an email and say I need to speak to you urgently, and that should do the job. If it doesn't, then there is a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Webb?
But I've just got to put on record that I really, really think that the staff that we have here are absolutely amazing. I've never had any problems, and if I I don't very often use the telephone nowadays, use emails, and the officers always get back to me. I don't really think of a case for a year that nobody has got back to me. I think they're absolutely fantastic in the times that we're in at the moment and the problems that they have to cope with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Are there any further questions for Councillor Smith? Sorry, Councillor Smith, I didn't introduce you. Sorry.
I'm having a bit of trouble focusing. Reference to technology and such like, can somebody please ensure that I actually get a system that functions? Because it went down again on Sunday, and quite frankly, it causes enormous distress at a very difficult time at the moment. So I would appreciate somebody actually looking after this member, please, and possibly other members who also have trouble. And this isn't a recent thing, Chairman. This has gone on for years. I have an issue as to how the communications and systems work in my locality. They don't function. So it's wonderful, your Monty Bot or whatever, I just can't access. So there will be a nod, and it might come on again.
I'm sorry to hear that, Councillor Smith. I've just spoken with Matt, and I'm going to task him as responsible as head of service to bring a report back to this committee on the customer contact arrangements to the committee. That will include the bot, the app and telephones. Is that okay? And computers.
So I mean, probably the IT arrangements for members would be a matter for Democratic Services Committee, but yeah, Councillor Smith, absolutely do understand your frustrations, and I'll pick that conversations. Admittedly, I don't share your frustrations. Mine works a little better, but I'll pick that back up with the head of service for IT when we leave the meeting. So I'm conscious we sort of digress somewhat from Sally's original report.
Councillor Webb, is your question regarding IT?
It is. I had a problem about a year ago, and Matt very kindly came out and sorted me out.
Okay,
and I'm sure that the same situation could happen with Councillor Smith. If somebody from SRS, or Matt even, who put his magic touch on my laptop, and I had problems for a few days, and it worked. Thank you, Matt.
If there's any more issues or comments with regards to IT, can we put them on an email to the Democratic Services Chair, please? Thank you. Councillor Harris, did you have a question? You had your hand up. No, you're fine. Members, are there any further questions for Sally on her brilliant report? It's always nice to see a report that you can easily intake the information. With regards to oh, sorry.
Your reference to it averages out about 11.2 days full-time equivalents of absence. Have we actually put a monetary value on that, the cost to this authority of staff being absent for 11.2, which is 2 weeks additional time? I would be interested to see that calculation.
Oh. I haven't got a figure to hand, but I'll look to be able to try and provide that to you. It's actually quite a difficult one to quantify because, yeah, it is difficult because you don't know. You know, it's a lot of work to go through everybody's absence and what grade they're on, etc. And then, of course, you've got cover costs as well. So there's a lot of indirect costs with sickness absence as well.
Should we just say accrued calculation?
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Can you tell me, with mental health issues, has it been identified which ones are work-related stress and home-related stress? Have we got that split?
Our categories for absence when we record, when managers record, just have the one reason for absence, which is mental health. But when our colleagues access occupational health support and counselling, that has some breakdown there. But to be quite honest, you know, that sometimes it's not absolutely clearly defined. So although we've got some really good stats from counselling, I think it's fair to say when you see an individual, it can be a combination of both. And in return to works and all the support that we provide, both HR and the manager, we look to address and help and support that colleague. And, you know, regardless of whether it's work related or not, it all, you know, adds to the lack of attendance. And we would try and help and support that colleague, regardless of whether it was work related or personal stresses. So we don't actually record the separate, the two separate issues, no.
Sorry, Councillor Harris?
Thank you, Chair. Just fascinating looking at Table 2. It's only schools and CYP that seem to have gastrointestinal problems. That seems to stand out there.
I think that's because of the nature of working with children, I suspect,
yeah,
yes.
Okay.
Thank you all. Are there any further questions now? No? Okay, thank you ever so much, Sally. If we can move on to item 6, climate change, scrutiny of draft response ahead of approval. And Hazel's here to present this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So, as you know, back in May, Councillor Watkins brought a motion forward to declare a climate emergency. And after quite a lot of debate, it was unanimously agreed. And in paragraph 3.1 there is the wording of what we've actually agreed to. So, subsequent to that declaration, officers have been undertaking various workshops to kind of brainstorm what does that mean for the council. The target that we have set is to reach zero carbon for our own council emissions from our operations by 2030. What does that mean? What should we be doing? What should we be changing the way we do things? New things that we should be doing? And so from those workshops, we came up with a series of over 100 different actions, and officers have been thinking about those actions in terms of what's the sort of cost. Now, it's not always easy for some of those to put, you know, hard cash on. Some of those things that perhaps change in the way we do things, it's not always easy to quantify. But, you know, are these things that are quite easy to do, wouldn't cost very much, or we can do within existing resources, or are they things that would require a much bigger kind of budget commitment or perhaps borrowing money to invest in? And we've been thinking about whether those actions, will they be have a small impact in terms of saving carbon, or will it be a big carbon saving? Will it be a carbon saving that can be attributed directly to kind of the council's own emissions, or is it something that we can do that would result in carbon savings somewhere else in the county? You know, it wouldn't actually show up in our figures, but it would help reduce carbon overall in the county. And so we've kind of narrowed all those actions, proposed actions, down into 10 different themes, which are listed in paragraph 3.6. So we're looking at energy and buildings, we're looking at renewable energy, how we manage green spaces, waste, various aspects of transport, making the transport we use greener and more sustainable, encouraging more active travel and public transport as well. Thinking about what we buy, thinking about how we can involve people and educate people and work with schools and communities. And also how we adapt to climate change, recognizing that even if we cut all our emissions to zero right now, we're still going to have to deal with impacts of climate change. That's, you know, the carbon up there is already causing changes to our climate that we can see. So thinking about those themes. We have taken the draft proposed actions to the Community Climate Champions group at the end of July, and they gave us some useful feedback and suggestions of additional ideas, and also offers of help, quite practical offers of help. There's a lot of expertise in our communities, and they're keen to work closely with us to help deliver our action plan once it's been finalised. So thinking about the actual recommendations that we're putting through, discussing today, the first one is whether members are happy with those 10 overall kind of themes. Have we kind of covered all the themes that we need to be thinking about? The second one, 2.2, is to look at those activities. It's still a long list. There's no kind of new money or additional resources coming from anywhere to make the climate, help us deal with our response to the climate emergency. So there'll be kind of challenging decisions in there about whether we've got the level of ambition right, whether we've got, whether we're being practical but also ambitious. There's the kind of a discussion around that we want to have. And also we're recommending to establish a member-led working group, which would be likely chaired by Councillor Pratt as the lead cabinet member, and could involve officers, members, and also members of our community who I know are very keen to be involved. So that really is the kind of outline. You've got a copy of the kind of draft response. The kind of beginning part is fairly straightforward, I think. And then the list of actions is what we would like feedback from our members on today, to understand whether we've got the level of ambition right. The tendency is for officers to kind of want to be ambitious and want to do lots, but also recognizing that they've got, restrained budgets and capacity. So there's a tendency to be pragmatic, but on the other hand, I know feedback that we've had from Councillor Pratt is that we need to have a high level of ambition here. We need to not be, too, just kind of restricting ourselves to, what can we do easily? What can we tweak here and there? A lot of this is about more fundamental changes to the way we do things and the way we think about things that we can't kind of wrap up just by a little tweak here and there. So they're the kind of decisions really and discussions that we'd like to have with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Can I now invite Cabinet Member Councillor Jane Pratt to speak? Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm delighted to be with you today as you scrutinise the draft response to the climate emergency. And we all have a massive responsibility to ensure that the actions that we take as individuals and in our community will reduce the carbon emissions in line with our declaration earlier this year. We cannot do this alone, and it will take a strong lead from every one of us and collaborative working across our communities, the whole of Wales, the UK and even the world, to save our planet for future generations. And this paper today is very much a working document, and the policy is being developed with your valued input to set our priorities. That's really what we want to achieve out of today. And I'm very grateful to Hazel and to Matt, who've worked together, leading officers over the summer, to put together this blueprint, which we now need to build on and get a fully costed report which will be brought before Council as soon as possible. Some of our ideas may not be feasible yet. We've spoken this morning about, a second solar farm, for example, and why, with the current restraints, that wouldn't be possible. But I think we do need to do a bit of blue sky thinking and really think about the changes that we need to make. And some of them may not be feasible yet. Some may require significant funding. And I think maybe that is a conversation that we will need to have at Cabinet level. Should we be putting some resources behind this? Because, we're doing a fantastic job, but Hazel does only work for 3 days a week. So, it's quite a challenge to get everything done. And we need to work together to really shape this plan, which is, really the biggest challenge for our generation. And I think, as Hazel said, we need to involve the members of our community that have got tremendous expertise. We had a fantastic meeting earlier this year in this chamber with superb presentations from people like Rob Proctor, who've got, fantastic knowledge of this particular subject. And I think also we need to involve our schools and our young people, and that brilliant centre we've got at Llanfoist, one of the only ones of its kind in the whole of the south of Wales, where we've got people coming from all over to visit that facility, and I think we should be very proud of that, and we need to really involve our young people in this as well. So, as a Cabinet member with responsibility for climate change, I do recognise the enormous task we have ahead of us, and we really do need to crack on with some pace from today with this. And, I really look forward to the debate that we're going to have now and hearing your views on what our priorities should be. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. I'll now hand over to members. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. This is the most important document I think that any of us will be receiving, and from that point of view, everyone should be receiving it. So, to my mind, it should be on every single select committee's agenda for consideration. Not only that, I think we as an authority should send this out to all town and community councils to ask them not just to receive it, but to actually debate it and come back to us. It's everyone's responsibility, basically, to save the earth, because that's the bottom line. So I'd like to see it disseminated much more, as far as we can possibly get it everywhere, if we possibly can. And it was interesting to hear that Hazel is part-time. Maybe this is such an important consideration that we ought to consider increasing the membership of your team. How many are there in your team, Hazel? Yeah. Well, yeah, there we go. If you're sick or something really nasty happens to you, who takes up the reins? We should seriously. This is such an important thing. We can't just have one person being responsible and part-time. To be perfectly honest, if we don't do something about that, we're not being serious. That's my opinion. While I'm on about it, we should be lobbying the Welsh Government as hard as possible to say, why isn't it mandatory for any roof, let's put it that way, that is possible to have solar panels on, for it to be mandatory that should happen. So any planning application that comes along with an appropriate south or west facing roof that hasn't got provision for solar panels on it should be turned down flat. We've got to be serious about this, and I just don't understand why it should be mandatory throughout the whole of the nation, where you can install anything that gets free energy from the sun that isn't installed is almost a criminal offence. And I think the same sort of thing will apply to any application that comes along to us for incinerators. If they haven't got energy from heat bolted on to them, then again, that is a criminal offence practically, I think. So there's various things to think about. Anyway, I welcome the report. It's extremely extensive, and it needs to be disseminated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I understand, Matt, you wanted to come in on some of those points, and then Hazel?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I'm in the odd position today of sort of being in the scrutiny seat, but being co-author of this report and having worked on it with Hazel. You're absolutely right, Councillor Harris, in terms of the importance of this item to all members. It was quite a late notice, but we did extend the invite. The Chair agreed to extend the invite of this committee to all members. Appreciate with people's diaries, it's not always possible. And however, it is going to have a whole council debate. Councillor Pratt is bringing it back to full council once this sort of pre-decision scrutiny on policy development scrutiny has been undertaken. In terms of broadening it out, it's also something that was discussed at the Public Service Board earlier in the week. And Public Service Board partners are receiving a paper next time out to potentially escalate some of the well-being objectives that sit at a whole public service level to take account of the, I suppose, increasing pace and need to act on the issue of climate change. I'd also add, Hazel knows this, I would rather like it if Hazel were able to work more than 3 days a week. And some of that is financial. I also sort of, we do sort of chip away slowly, but back to those issues of quality of life. Hazel also has a busy life outside of work. Periodically, we've managed to persuade her to increase her 3 days a week to 4 days a week.
She needs somebody else to help her, that's what I'm saying.
Would you like to come? Oh, sorry, Hazel.
Just coming back on that, Chair, Jane is going to bring it back to a full council, but I think it should be a special full council. This is so important. You know, we should be taking hours and hours debating this, to be perfectly honest, and we don't want loads of other stuff on the agenda getting in the way. So maybe if Jane could take that into consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Hazel?
Thank you. Just a few things. So I am only 3 days a week, but I like only being 3 days a week. But my role is kind of coordinating it, and please, I want everyone to recognise, there's a huge amount of work from officers across the council that have gone into this. So every sort of proposed potential action in there is allocated to a named officer from different departments, and they've been responsible for thinking about how viable that is, working up any costings, how it would work, and that kind of thing. So although it's important to have that kind of coordination and bringing it together, there's lots of people across the council who are thinking about this. Just a couple of things in terms of lobbying Welsh Government. Last week, myself and Robert Dwyer and Councillor Watkins went to a conference with Extinction Rebellion at the Senedd last week, and about 6 or 7 a.m.s came down to hear recommendations that had come from the workshops that we had of things that we would like the Assembly to do. The building regs one wasn't a specific one that came up, but one that did come up quite strongly was around grid capacity, which is something we've already briefly talked about this morning. It's not easy to just bung extra solar farms in, because in Monmouthshire the grid hasn't got the capacity to take all that extra power in those places. So there's things that we were able to lobby the Welsh Government about there, and also in particular to do with building regs. One of the things that came up at the workshop is colleagues of ours from our building regs team actually sit on the kind of working group with Welsh Government at the moment, because they're redoing and revamping the building regulations at the moment in Wales. So we do have officer representation on that actual working group, which is good. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention about town and community councils, I think is a great idea, send it out to them. Monmouth Town Council have already declared a climate emergency, so they've got kind of a working group made up of town council and local councillors and members of the public. Transition towns are involved, working on what they're focusing on there. And only just last week I had a conversation with Chepstow Town Council as well, who are looking to take a report there, looking to declare a climate emergency there as well. So I was able to share kind of our thoughts so far, but certainly we can send that out to all of them and have an input from there. And they can, you know, our kind of action plan will be focused on reducing our own direct emissions, but also where we can, working with others to reduce sort of wider emissions. So it would be good for the town and community councils to be able to kind of look at what we're looking to do and see how they can contribute and what they can be doing at a local level to feed in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Webb?
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Guppy?
Yeah, this is just a huge area, and it's sort of seeing what the little things we can do, but the greater things. Just looking at the education involvement, and I'm not quite sure how fluid the statements underneath mean, but it's a bit to help people understand. But I can't see in these 10 headings about how we're working with businesses in view of the businesses within Monmouthshire. What knowledge have we got of what they're actually doing, and maybe helping them so that it's a partnership approach. But I'm not quite sure if that's captured within the headings and it's not shown up. Because obviously things need to be broken down into these headings, but I can't see, and it's not jumping out at me to say we actually want to involve the businesses within Monmouthshire.
Thank you, Hazel. Sorry, I'm just writing notes.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a fair comment. So far, it's primarily been council officers and members of the community who are primarily third sector who have had an input. That said, we have had some input from a few renewable energy companies who were involved with or have been along to the Community Climate Champions. So we have had a perspective from them. But no, in terms of, you know, wider business engagement, it's not really something that we have done a huge amount on at the moment. And you're right, I'm sure there's lots going on there. Perhaps it's a conversation that we need to have with colleagues in the kind of enterprise team about what we can be doing to work with them. I mean, again, our focus is on reducing our own emissions because that's what we're committed to. And it's hard for us to have a direct impact on what businesses do, but that's not to say we can't be kind of supporting and encouraging and, you know, working in partnership where we can.
Quickly. I mean, there is an opportunity to influence business through the procurement process as well, because obviously we procure over £100 million worth of goods and services via Monmouthshire, dealing with a huge amount of businesses that can also bring to the party their expertise and knowledge in terms of doing the right thing from a climate perspective. So through the procurement of goods and services, we can influence and educate businesses to work with us to deliver our climate agenda. So that's something as part of the corporate procurement objectives and the sustainable procurement policy that we're going to be drafting over the next couple of months, we'll look to try and exploit further.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question of statistics. You mentioned in 3.2 that the county's emissions have dropped from 900,000 tonnes to 650,000 tonnes since 2016. How do you get those statistics? And further on from that, statistics don't mean a lot to a lot of people. You mentioned the council emits about 8,700 tonnes of carbon per year. I know what 8,700 tonnes of, say, steel looks like, but people don't know what 8,000 tonnes, 7,000 tonnes of carbon look like. So numbers to people, it just goes over the head. We need to find a better way of illustrating exactly what we are putting into the atmosphere. It's, as I say, I can see what 8,500 tonnes of steel look like. It's a bloody great lump, a great lump. And our carbon would be far greater because of the density of it. But people, I would imagine, we've got to find some ways of getting the public to understand in a better way.
Hazel, would you like?
That's going to come back in.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually. You think about, often things are compared to the size of Wales, aren't they? When you know, we've lost an area of rainforest the size of Wales. We've sort of consumed an area of carbon the size of it. You're absolutely right. I also have zero idea of what 8,000 tonnes of carbon look like. You know, is it enough gas to fill the Principality Stadium? I genuinely have no idea. So I think that's a very good point. We need to get better at sort of illustrating these things in language that people understand. So you'll see within the front part of the report there's an infographic, but I think some of the things you've said today can help us improve on that further. So it is very much a draft response at the moment. Back to your challenge, Councillor Eason, and as a bit of a statistics geek, I'm really appreciative of that question. The data at a county level is gathered by national statistics. I'm not precise in terms of the actual measurement, but they have data for all industries, sectors, and outputs around the UK. So it's gathered from a mix of sources, including sort of energy consumption, fuel consumption, and then they convert that into the amount of carbon that would have been put out from it. Of course, I imagine it won't be perfect, and it's quite hard to measure carbon at the very local level. The very fact that the gases don't obey geographical boundaries means that, you know, this is why this is a global issue for us. But worth mentioning is that trend you mentioned. You know, our carbon emissions as a county have gone down from circa 900,000 to 650,000. That just mirrors the UK trend. So yes, less carbon is being put into the environment from Monmouthshire, but that downward trend at the moment mirrors what's happening in the UK, from things like the move to electric cars, cheaper fuel sources going into to sort of the national grid, cleaner fuel sources, I should say. So when you look at globally at some of the best performing territories in the world, you see that they are exceeding that downward trend that's happening globally. And I guess that's the challenge for us in Monmouthshire. What can we do to accelerate activity here beyond those natural sort of background changes?
Yes, we got to bring it down to the level of understanding. For example, our vehicles knock out 3,000 tonnes per year, 5 days a week. That's 60 tonnes of carbon every day, as you might say. So to illustrate to the general public what is happening, I think they're the sort of things you've got to put to them, rather than big figures of 900,000. It just goes over the head. It's public knowledge and information is important.
It is a really good point, and I started to think about it for an article on the Hub. You know, it's not in the report you've seen, but I tried to kind of quantify it in a bit more of a visual way. So the amount of carbon emitted from council buildings and street lights last year produced enough carbon dioxide to fill over 1,600 hot air balloons. So that's the sort of thing that it would be good, you know, maybe that would help a bit more. And council staff drove 1.73 million miles for business travel in their own cars, which is enough to drive, this is Paul Matthews' statistic, that's enough to drive around the world 70 times. So that's the kind of thing, but that perhaps brings it to life a bit more, yeah.
So we had a lot of hot air in Parliament yesterday.
Thank you, Hazel. Councillor Smith, and then Councillor Devi and Councillor Harris.
I always find it quite interesting. We sit here and we deliberate on these things, and we're sitting in a room that's actually got 30 lights blazing away. The majority of our building, our employees operate in artificial light, which I know we've got our panels on the roof, but we're very busy using up anything we generate. So it's a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? I find it, we can do small things, There's something that I find a great irritation. I got quite irritated, not irritated, really very, very upset by seeing a child get a face full, another forward-facing buggies, a face full of exhaust, walking through the streets in Usk. A problem that we could easily remove by removing the parked cars. People continually say, why don't they move it? Why do we allow parking there? You need to have your traffic following through cleanly. We could really achieve something for the community because the quality of air in Usk has improved. There's an air quality committee that looks at. The readings have come down. They've come down to what is deemed an acceptable level. That's not an acceptable level. It is a polluting level still, as Hazel would agree with me. We could really, really help the situation by saying that there should be no parking outside the retail premises so that you can take your traffic straight through slowly at the 20 mile an hour. Instead of causing a backlog that can generate, I have counted 20 vehicles waiting to get out of Usk, pumping their exhaust fumes into the air. What a nonsense. It builds up on the old Abergavenny Road and you have wonderful congestion for the sake of 3 or 4 cars being wrongly parked. So that's a very simple thing we could do to improve not only the quality of air in that area, but also ensuring that traffic travels through at the 20 miles an hour, which generates less pollution than people revving up and ripping through and having to stop and accelerate. So that really gets to me. Sensible, easy solution that's there in Monmouthshire's hands. And the majority of people you talk to in the area say, why on earth do they allow that, Val? Well, you talk to your highways engineers who know it all. If we're going to make representations at some time, please, to the Welsh Government, I intend to do that on my own little thing as an independent. Could we ask them to reconsider construction of the Severn Barrage? We all know the benefits, the huge environmental benefits, and the employment benefits that that scheme could generate. You're looking at construction of Hinkley Point, that will continue. There are design issues at the moment. There are some failures in some of the products. It is again rolling back a few more years before we see that facility functioning. And also, while you're there at the Welsh Government, I really think they should reconsider their resolution to not do anything at the moment about the M4. Because as I drive out from Newport in the evening over the bridge, which is free, that's nice, isn't it, coming back? I can drive past traffic, 2 lines of solid traffic that if there's any interruption to flow is solid up until Mega. I think it is astounding. So representation to the Welsh Government, shift a few cars to improve the air quality down there, look at the level of speed that we actually drive within this authority, the areas. Look at the actual speed. We know that a lower speed limit generates less pollution, and we do nothing about these things. So I thank you very much, Chairman, and best of luck with Welsh Assembly.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Hazel, would you like to come back on that?
Lots of people talk about the parking on Usk High Streets, on the Bridge Street, so I will certainly pass your comments on to the Highways team for them to deal with. I don't know enough about the Severn Barrage, but certainly we can. Yeah, I know it has. It's something we can ask about, certainly.
It's something that should be pushed. We should be saying as a local authority, this is a good proposal. This is a good scheme. I actually am I'm quite keen on birds. I do a fair amount of bird spotting. I'm not too perturbed. They relocated quite well when they had to with the Newport initiative. What happened? Why did we? No, the Cardiff Barrage, wasn't it? And the birds relocated quite happily. So, yeah, it is something as a council we should be looking at and we should be supporting.
Sorry, Matt, did you say you wanted to come in then?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just as the debate continues, I'm not looking to stop the debate because this is really valuable. One of the things as a committee we're sort of hoping you're able to work through this morning is this is a policy development piece. Obviously, Councillor Pratt is going to be bringing this back to Council. There's a lot of information in this action plan. Some of it you may see is in the realms of quick wins. Some of it is quite ambitious. The first time we looked at it, Councillor Pratt, I hope you won't say this, you felt some of it lacked the necessary ambition that you were hoping to see. We've passed around a couple of A3 copies of this morning as we're discussing it. So there are two sort of full A3 copies and a couple of pens. I was going to use dots. I stopped in a large supermarket this morning to buy some plastic dots, but they came in single-use. Well, they came in single-use plastics. Well, no, we shall give you pens. So one of the things we'd like you to do is as we're discussing this morning, and please continue to feedback after the meeting, as members, look at those large copies of the action plans that have come out. Have a look under each of those 10 objectives, because one of the things you're considering, are those 10 objectives the right 10 things? But also then the tasks that fall underneath them, if you could do one thing under those 10 objectives, what would it be? And it's almost one blob per thing. If you've got red and green would be nice, but I appreciate we've only got one red and green pen and there's a lot of members in this room. But, and then secondly, are there things in there which you think are ambitious, but you don't think are feasible? You think perhaps because of trade-offs or other factors, there are things we would be unable to deliver by 2020. So for each of those 10 objectives, what's your top thing that you would like to see delivered? And secondly, is there anything in that list that you think, no, that's unachievable, we shouldn't be putting our energy into that area? Because that will give Councillor Pratt, as she sort of tasks officers with further developing this action plan after this committee, a gauge of the types of activities that members, when they come back as detailed proposals, would be willing to endorse at the council. And also that sense, as members, you unanimously declared a climate emergency. Does the document, the action plan you see before you today, have the necessary ambition and precision behind it to give us a chance as a local authority of reducing our climate emissions to net zero by 2030. So think, there are a huge amount of sort of local issues that emerge from this, and I really appreciate them being highlighted, because sometimes it's the small changes that total up to the big differences. But we are looking, as members, you have signed up to a tremendous undertaking. Will what you see before you today in terms of that draft climate response give you the confidence to stand up as members, to be accountable in your communities for what this council is able to deliver? Will it get us to where we need to be by 2030?
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Dovey, you had a question?
Just listening to all the contributions, it's sort of fascinating, isn't it? And it's huge. Talking about what we can do about the climate on our own, well, we can make changes, but it's not going to be significant on our own. We've got the changes we can make is got to be made by neighbours, but the sort of things we could do on our own is, for instance, change the requisites within our planning, so that anybody who wants to develop estates in Monmouthshire, then within the planning requirement should be in the estates access for buses to go through the estates. Nowadays, if you have an estate in Monmouthshire, there is little provision made for bus services, for them to be particularly convenient, and so people automatically go to their car. You've got to stop them go into their car, so you change the provision for the car within the estates. They should be allowed to have a car. You shouldn't take that away. But what you should be within the estates is making provision for buses to be able to go through the estates so that the public can get on the bus and those services link up with the rail or wider bus services elsewhere. You've got to start. This is like growing a twig, you know. It's or the way a stream runs to the sea. It gradually builds up. If you get all these pieces right, you build up a significant amount of business, of water, electricity, or traffic. That you've got to think in those terms, and we don't do that. And the developers have been allowed to get away with that for a long time. And I think we are going to ask for something different. I think Mark Hand has got his head around how we should be looking at that. So basically, what I'd say is you've got to get our transport needs and our planning requirements linked together, so that they've got to work for Commerce and they've got to work for Joe Public. Great deal of jobs with that. We are doing things in Monmouthshire that are pretty good with the strategy group, and part of it we have got the first in Wales, and I think probably one of the only ones in the country, where we're trying to get a station in Mager where and we're very close to it, where the public actually walk to the station. You know what? And it will be a great success. So if we think, again, this is planning and transport thinking together. The other thing, we have got to be pressing the Welsh Government for us to have the metro right the way up to Chepstow, because that is the biggest development belt that there is. Chepstow is going to grow in terms of numbers, so you've got to be thinking of doing that, and that is something you can do within the county. There's always going to be a need for haulage, and so the big thing that will change all of us for this is when we get the what is it, the gas instead, but hydrogen. Thanks, Val. Sometimes words go out of my mind, but hydrogen is the way for all of us, and we should be pressing for that. And interestingly enough, we have within Monmouthshire a company down in Usk that are working and specialising in the development of the hydrogen cell. We ought to be learning from what they are doing down there. It's quite a unique technology. When this takes off, it is going to be huge. Val with the Severn barrage, she is really on the button with this, because, as I said, transport is going to continue. Haulage will always be with us. There isn't, you'll get so much you can put on the rail, but there's an awful lot will still continue to go on the road, and it will be more acceptable because it will go with the hydrogen cells. It won't be traditional motor fuels. But I think the big issue in this side of the Severn is the Welsh Government can't make up its mind what to do about the Black Route and whatnot, the motorway through to Haverfordwest and beyond. And I think there is an option But it means, again, we have to think out of the box, if you like, and think about working with other counties around us. And I actually believe that you could split the traffic flow if you had the Severn barrage, which carries a road. And I know people say that is far, far too expensive, but it needn't be far, far too expensive. And the reason I say this is we've got an energy crisis in this country, a really big energy crisis in this country, and it's made even worse because 2 of the nuclear power sites that were key to our energy platform have been cancelled. And that is the one at Albury and the other one at Wilton, North Wales. So we've lost 2 of those, and I've tried as I might, I haven't found anybody who is proposing an alternative. So the Severn barrage could, in actual fact, provide energy, and it could provide another route across the Severn, which would come out further down by my favourite pub, actually, Captain's Wife, down near Penarth. That would be, and joking aside, that area has been cited already. So there are things that we can do by trying to influence, if you like. Be leaders here. Think out of the box. Do something. Down in the Assembly, you haven't got anybody who can think about anything other than fighting with one another. So there are things we can do. We should be people, not only what we can do physically, we should be people that, as a county, we should be known for innovation, and we should be looking at this really, really seriously. I could go on for ages, but that's what I think we can. I think that's what we can do.
Thank you, Councillor Devi, for that. Hazel, do you have any comments with regards to Councillor Devi's comments, or any comment? No? Okay. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, before we start doing this exercise, we are disseminating to the public, and on page 2, build and operate 2 new solar farms subject to national grid capacity. It's been mentioned before that we may not be able to do this because we can't feed into the national grid. Now that, to my mind, is absolute madness. Is that the actual case? Why is there not capacity on the national grid to take energy saving operations that we want to bring in? Is there anything we can do about it? I've not heard this before.
Matt would like to come in on this. Is that okay, Hazel?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's a very good question. It comes back to this point of ambition. Because I think as officers, when we first sat down and worked on producing this action plan, the action read something along the lines of exploring the feasibility of. Discussions with sort of Deb Hill-Howells, head of estates, confirmed the fact in terms of the capacity, the carrying capacity in the national grid of the local energy supply, Western Power Distribution. Currently, there is not enough capacity in the national grid for us to put 2 solar farms, for example, in the south of the county. Now, it might be, Mark alluded to the fact earlier on, one option might be to create our own energy generation company. It doesn't necessarily give more capacity in the national grid. But in having these conversations with both Councillor Pratt as Cabinet member, and also sort of played this one out with the Chief Exec around the level of ambition. One of the things to consider as a council is there a desire to commit to things which are not yet fully achievable? And in the report, we talk about the climate activist Greta Thunberg and her cathedral thinking. Sometimes you have to start things before you know how you can finish them. And in a sense, that's a challenge. Do we give the leader of the council and the chief exec of the council a headache by saying we need 2 new solar farms, and actually task them in their leadership roles with lobbying, campaigning, and working with people outside of Monmouthshire to create the conditions to enable these things to happen. So as members, you could choose to make a commitment, which is hard, if not yet technically possible to deliver. But I guess when Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon, no one had, within 10 years, no one had thought that was going to be possible.
Councillor Pratt, did you want to come in?
Briefly mention, I don't know whether you had the same email as me, Matt, I think you did, that I just wanted to mention that Blaenau Gwent, we're working, they've got 459,000 from the Office of Low Emission Vehicles to install electric vehicle charging points in car parks in residential areas. And this is across Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, Monmouthshire, Newport and Torvine. And I was only out on Monday with Councillor Woodhouse in Abergavenny. We were walking down some of the streets there where you've got terraced houses and everybody's parked on the street, and we were having the conversation, was everybody going to charge their cars up if they've got an electric car? So I thought that was quite an interesting development, that we're going to have some more points put in Monmouthshire car parks. So I think that's a welcome bit of news, really. That was yesterday.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Can I just highlight, Val, Councillor Smith, with regards to the comments you made on the road going through Ersk, Mark Hand has sent an email because he's watching us on the live stream, so say hi to Mark. Just to confirm, this parking and traffic flow issue is on my radar, in my new highways remit, and is something I wish to progress. Now that the 20-mile-an-hour limit is in place, my personal, although non-expert opinion, view is that the traffic calming argument is no longer makes sense. So it's in Mark's remit, and he is going to deal with it.
I'm very grateful for that. Mark, you listening hard. Could you also consider when the 20-mile-an-hour limit comes over the bridge, it's then turns to 30 miles coming through Lambaddock. And everybody, well, the majority of people come over the bridge and they put their foot down. So again, that's an area that now we do monitor the exhaust fumes that come up, but it's an area that also should be considered perhaps in his thinkings, please, Mark, that we need 20 through there.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A lot has been said this morning, and maybe a lot of what I want to say has been said. I wouldn't for 1 minute poo-poo the barrage, and I know that the M4 Blackroot has been hit on the head. But if they both came back, we're talking about 10 years before they would be active. So I think that. So what's wrong then?
That was me.
So. In terms of today's discussion, I think they're discussions of the future, quite honestly, because they're so far in the future, we'll be looking at different forms of transport probably then. But to the M4 at the moment, 30% of it, 30% of the time is used up for traffic jams. Only 30%, early in the morning and late at night, sometimes different times when you've got events on. But it can't be that bad when you consider that 8,500 vehicle drivers were fined last year for speeding in that section of the M4. So you've got to balance out what people were caught doing as opposed to those who were actually sitting in traffic jams. We need to be innovative in how we look at reducing that carbon footprint. For example, we will have the A465 up and running in the next 12 months or so. I'm not quite sure exactly when. But we need to be prepared now to have innovative traffic management schemes at Raglan to do what most probably the lorry drivers are aware of at the moment. They can't use the A465 at the moment, but it will become their prime route eventually to Swansea. But we need to encourage drivers to use that when it's there with innovative transport schemes. Equally, on the M4 at the area of Mega, we should build in schemes there to control traffic at peak periods, which will give some priority to the traffic which is coming off the M4 without detracting too much from the traffic which is coming from the industrial parks. There are ways of resolving some of these problems to reduce this 30% of the time where we're getting traffic just churning out carbon between Mega and the other side of Newport. I think we've got to look at other ways of doing it rather than saying, look, the future is going to be the Ballards, the future is going to be another M4. Even either of those will be a long, long way away, 10 to 12 years away. So I think innovative ideas should be put in place now to find ways of, when the A465 is open, to direct traffic to use that route all the way to Swansea. Take it off the Calder, for example.
Hazel, can I make a suggestion? Jude Langdon is carrying out a networking event in the Sevenside area. Tony and I went to a meeting, was it last week, week before? And it's bringing together community groups. One of the community groups is Mega Station, which obviously I fully support because it gets people off the M4. I think it'd be worth Monmouthshire having yourself there if possible to represent, you know, our climate change action plan. Would that be a possibility, maybe? Because I think, you know, we want to work in partnership with experts in the community. I know a handful of people in the Sevenside area that could help us progress with this. So I think it would be a good opportunity to meet them and get their support. Yeah,
to support the points you're making, yes. Yes, I support the need for a Mega Station, but if you've got a station there or a Severn Tunnel in Caldecott, you've got to have the local service trains to support them. And as far as I'm aware, the metro system will not be available to support those stations because it may stop at Llanwern. We've got to get transport off the roads and onto more beneficial ways of travelling. But equally, we've got to make sure that we've got the traffic there to that we've got the services there to get the traffic off the roads and to support it. I'm of the view that the metro should go as far as Lydney, because a lot of traffic comes from Lydney to Monmouthshire. But yes, just to support your comments, that's all.
Are there any further questions from members on this? No? Okay, thank you. I'm going to sum up this one first, and then I'm going to go back to people services because I forgot to sum up on that one. So 0 point to chair today on the summing up. So we've scrutinised this item thoroughly. I think everyone made some rather good recommendations. Councillor Dovey spoke with a lot of passion, which I think we all echo. So Councillor Harris would like to see this report go to town and community councils for feedback. You have suggested that maybe Hazel's team increases slightly. Yeah. Obviously, there's. Yes, she has input from heads of department, so maybe it's something we can monitor. There was a lot around building regulations going forward. Would like Welsh Government to recognise this with planning. Obviously, Hazel, you said that we have an officer on a working group with Welsh Government on shaping requirements. For instance, the solar panels on houses, where appropriate to be fitted. What else is there? Buildings, solar panels, Central Council, partnership approach. Linda Guppy raised a partnership approach, working with Monmouthshire businesses, and how they are tackling the problem themselves. So reaching out to businesses based in Monmouthshire, yes. Okay. Councillor Smith would like us to lobby Welsh Government to reconsider the Severn barrage, a resolution on the M4, and obviously looking at speed limits. Councillor Eason also illustrating statistics to provide a clearer picture. Councillor Dovey was concerned regarding bus provisions and encouraged developers and transport needs and work together. Welsh Government. Councillor Dovey obviously asked us to encourage more work to be done around hydrogen vehicles and to keep up to date on the progress made around hydrogen vehicles. Obviously, we spoke about the traffic and parking issues faced in wards around Monmouthshire. Well, I think Councillor Harris would like to, and Councillor Harris also suggested lobbying outside council for a second solar farm. And obviously, Councillor Pratt, you said about the electric points being put in around the car parks. So, the committee has examined the long list of potential activities. We've given out tables for you to obviously put what you think is important. So if you could give those back before you leave today. And we were going to set up a working group that Jane will chair. So what will happen now going forward with that? Who will be organising this working group and reaching out to the other select committees members? Will that be you, Hazel? Matt? That would be you.
Yeah, Chair, probably pick that up outside of the meeting with Councillor Pratt and to discuss sort of potential membership and look to get that up and running as soon as possible to inform the paper that Councillor Pratt will take through to Council. And continue to run on overseeing that for future phases of delivery. I believe the paper is on the planner for the meeting in October. A big continues, you know, still a huge amount of work to be done in getting that paper paper ready. So I think it will continue to be an evolving and continuously shaping piece of work as we sort of react to external opportunities and sort of ongoing emergence of new evidence.
Thank you ever so much, Hazel, for coming today. Just to go back to people's services, I do apologise that I missed that out. Naughty me. Councillor Eason, you raised a point on stress levels within contact centres and receiving feedback and encouraging employees to provide feedback, which I think falls into Councillor Harris's comments with regards to logging any aggressive or poor behaviour towards staff and keeping those records and monitoring those going forward. I think Sally said that she was going to come back with how we fare compared to other councils within Wales. So we'll await her to come back with those figures. Councillor Dovey raised concerns with, although we have some great, oh gosh, my words. Sorry, having a brain freeze. We have some brilliant tools such as Monty, the toolbox, the chat box, sorry, and we have the My Monmouthshire app. He still thinks it's important that people get to speak to someone, and that can obviously increase frustrations within constituents within Monmouthshire. And Val Smith wanted a cost on the 11.2 days to the authority as well. Did I miss anything on that? Or am I okay? Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. And then we move on to item 7, to confirm the minutes of previous meeting held on the 11th of July 2019. Oh, sorry.
In the preamble on the last item, we took a report in Caldicot Town Council last night regarding photovoltaic cells on certain council buildings and not what. And one came up was a question about the Jubilee Way car park in Caldicot, which is owned by the council, but the toilet is owned by the council. And we didn't make a decision last night because we needed a bit more information on what to do. It would need involvement with the county council if we went along that route. So could I leave that with Hazel?
Thank you, Councillor Eason. So if we go to item 7, if we do it page by page, is that okay? So page 79. Anyone have any comments? Is that the right one? Yeah. Page 80. And page 81. No? Are you all happy with those minutes? Yeah. So Councillor Harris and Councillor Webb. Thank you. And then we've got Strong Communities Forward Work Programme. Am I okay to hand over to you, Matt, for that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. obviously, clearly there for information. The next meeting of the committee is the special meeting on the 15th, when you'll consider the litter strategy and the waste collections policy and civic amenity sites. We've had no specific items emerging from the agenda today that would be added to the work programme, although under the item on contact centre, I did offer to make available to the committee, in terms of my head of capacity rather than scrutiny role, information regarding sort of contact centre and sort of customer arrangements in response to the debate there. So I will circulate that, and it's something you can decide whether you wish to receive as a committee formally, or just receive as a piece of information.
Matt, can we look at that and room availability of the chambers? Okay, we'll have
Yeah.
to come back to you on that, because we need to check if the chambers is available.
We can explore that. So I know, conscious that it depends on individual members, because sometimes people do have morning commitments and would have set diaries around this, particularly where people have work commitments in the morning. But absolutely understand the reason for the question. So we'll explore that and confirm with members.
And the Cabinet and Council forward work programme? Yeah. Okay. And the next meeting, like Matt said, is the 15th of October at 3 p.m, but we will look into seeing if we can bring that forward. Thank you ever so much, members, for attending today. I do apologise, I've been very forgetful today. It's lack of sleep. Thank you.